Welcome to our presentation on Banff National Park, a protected area located in the province of Alberta, Canada. Not only does Banff National Park have a colorful and rich history, but it is one of the most beautiful tourist destinations in the world, just one of the reasons why we picked it for our presentation. I am joined by my partners Reagan Poskevich and Gretchen Smith in presenting what makes this protected area so special. The history of Banff National Park is very intriguing. Prior to the establishment of the park, settlers utilized the land for over 10,000 years. Numerous indigenous peoples occupied the territory, including the Kootenai, Stoney, Blood, Piegan, Siksika, and Tsuut'ina, until the Canadian government ultimately excluded them in 1877. Within these indigenous communities, they established a hunting and gathering culture where they relied on various species of fish and big game animals as their main sources of food. In addition, they even traded furs and meat with other settlers in the territory until the government ultimately decided that the indigenous groups should be banned from hunting and gathering in the territory. However, that policy has since been reversed in the last 50 years. Banff National Park contains an abundance of breathtaking tourist attractions. Here in this image, we see just one of countless lakes that are surrounded by beautiful forestry and the Rocky Mountains. When discussing the national park, it is important to note how Banff became a protected area. Initially, it was a transportation and service center for the tourism industry in 1886. However, the Treaty 7, established in 1877, allowed the Canadian government to remove ownership of the land from Indigenous people as well as forcibly move them onto reserves. In 1887, Banff was renamed Rocky Mountains Park, which in turn led to a large expansion within the protected area. Major stakeholders in the establishment of the park included Parks Canada Agency and the Canadian government, which is why they forcibly moved Indigenous peoples onto reserves in an attempt to increase conservation and biodiversity within the territory. As time began to pass, Banff National Park became a popular location for wealthy tourists, and beautiful hotels were built around it, as well as many gift shops.
Banff National Park is an IUCN in Category 2. A Category 2 protected area is described as a large natural area set aside to protect ecosystems, species, and area characteristics. The management objective is to protect, along with provide recreation and education to tourists. The park also has rules in place to make sure that tourists are respectful and cause as little damage as possible. Banff also strives to maintain all natural resources and needs of local communities. This encourages more tourism and stimulates local economies. There are many threats to Banff National Park. The first threat is highways and wildlife. Highway effects on wildlife poses a huge threat for sustainability and wildlife in the park. This also adds to wildlife exclusion in certain areas, which then damages species and where they are able to live. The next threat is federal budget cuts. Federal budget cuts are dangerous because they will reduce the ability to do effective research and monitoring of the park. This will also increase the park's vulnerability to threats and make it more difficult to assume future risks. The next threat is growing industrial development. This pressures the park to grow industrially and make more money rather than grow in sustainability. This includes building high structures or hotels or implementing pay-per-use attractions. Proposed boundaries are dangerous in the same way, for the same reason. They promote the park as an attraction rather than a piece of history and nature. Inappropriate tourism is the next threat and maybe the most detrimental. Inappropriate tourism threatens the well-being of ecosystem and hurts the relationships between the natives and the tourists. This can pose a huge threat to the protected area and also can cause damage to humans. This photo shows wildlife on the side of one of Banff's highways. This is obviously very dangerous to not only the animals and species around, but also humans driving up and down the highways. As previously stated, inappropriate tourism is a large issue not only in Banff National Park, but in other protected areas as well. Inappropriate tourism threatens the ecosystem as a whole. It can cause damage to species, land, and historical value of the land. This often causes relationships with natives and tourists to decline. This is due to the tourists' lack of responsibility and consideration of the land. This often happens when tourists or tourist management groups focus on business and infrastructure rather than nature and ecosystem protection. The indirect causes of inappropriate tourism include promotional advertisements that encourage tourism to the park and lack of education on park sustainability. This leads to over-tourism and poor treatment of the park. The underlying cause is the popularity of the park. Although this is great for tourism and revenue and the economy, it can also lead to over-tourism and inappropriate tourism.
Protected areas have put in a plan to manage the external threats. Parks Canada has adopted ecosystem management to help manage the threats to Banff National Park. This encourages partnerships where park managers can communicate with one another in order to effectively manage internal and external threats. This also includes the park's basic rules and guidelines, which include the Species at Risk Act and enforces no drones along with other rules. Relating to management principles of threats. A systematic assessment of human-caused threats may aid effective management. Under this, I have put highway effects on wildlife. The sustainability of the areas at threat as highways and other man-made projects contribute to environmental damage. A systematic assessment can decrease the threats that are caused due to highways and other man-made projects. Regulations coupled with adequate policing may be required to address some threats. Threats such as federal budget cuts, the ability to do required research and monitoring of the land is limited but can expand with adequate policies and regulations. The proposed boundaries do not contribute to protection of ecosystems. Regulations and policies can help control the boundaries and increase the protection of ecosystems. An effective environmental planning process are necessary to combat threats to PAs. Under this, I have put inappropriate tourism as economy and well-being of the ecosystem is put at threat, and effective environmental planning can increase the safety of the ecosystem while also growing the economy.
Thank you for listening and exploring Banff National Park with us.